Hello and welcome back to Penrose from Scratch. This is episode 6 and we're going to be having a look at status bar widgets. So the last couple of episodes have been kind of building up to this. We've had a look at how we add custom code into the window manager, we've had a look at hooks, we've had a look at state extensions, and a lot of that, the main kind of way I make use of that in the Penrose crate so far is with the status bar. There's like a few other bits and pieces in there, and there's lots of cool stuff we can do with it that I'd like to add to the crate when I've got some time. But for now, the kind of poster child for all that kind of stuff is this status bar down at the bottom here. And if you have a look as I move my kind of mouse between screens, you can't see it off on the screen I'm running OBS on. But the status bar changes just from moving the mouse around. And this is because it's being driven by hooks, like we looked at a couple of episodes ago. So anytime events are coming through and going through the main window manager event loop, those are triggering kind of logic in the status bar. Anytime we kind of refresh that internal state and kind of re-render out to the X server, that's triggering updates in the status bar. And there's all sorts of different bits and pieces we can do. Now, back in episode 2, where we had a look at just getting a couple of things set up so that minimal example that we started with wasn't quite so minimal, we added a status bar using a built-in helper function. And that helper function was this. It's penrose-ui status bar. Now, this is pretty much a clone of the DWM built-in status bar, if you've ever used DWM before. And you probably, if you have used DWM before, you'll probably have noticed that what we've got down at the bottom down here looks pretty familiar. You've got a little bit kind of telling you which workspace you're on. You've got a little bit telling you which layout's currently running. We need to add some new layouts so that actually changes, but we'll look at that later. And then that middle bit that's kind of highlighted in blue at the moment is the title of the current window. So if you have a look just now, it says status bar in penrose-ui. If I change the tab, Firefox changes its window title, and that changes with it. If I go back to workspace 2, where I've got a terminal, Tmux is setting this to have a window title of to-do, and so the name changes to to-do. So that's a widget that's kind of looking at the name, the X11 kind of window name of the window that's currently got focus, and then we just stick that name down here in the bottom. And then off on the right, where it says we really should put something more useful down here, this is the same kind of idea as DWM again. So this is something where you can look at window properties. I think we looked at this before when we were doing the kind of named scratchpad stuff and hooks and things. So if I use xprop, I can run that and I can click, and it will give me a bunch of properties. And these are the properties of the window I just clicked on. So I just clicked on the terminal window we've got here, which is Kitty. So it's telling us about Kitty. And I think I should be able to just click on on the desktop. I can also do this. Yeah, I can also do xprop-root, and that will tell me information about the root window, which is kind of a window that is kind of owned and set by your window manager. And so if you have a look here, if we look for the window manager name, it should be in here somewhere. Here we go. WM name is a string. We really should put something more useful down here. And that is the string that we're rendering out down here. And so that's really how that widget on the end works. It's you call xprop, so, oh sorry, not xprop. So xprop is how we query it. There's a program called xsetRoot, and we can set the name, and we can say something different. And it will change to something different down the bottom. And that's kind of it. This is kind of a tool that lets you run whatever code you want. Usually the way that people do this is they write a shell script that's just a loop that kind of sleeps at the end. So it will work out a bunch of stuff, generate a string, store that down in the window, in the root window name, and then that renders out in the status bar. And you can use that to kind of store whatever text you want down the bottom. So you can do things like get the current date, and and then store that down there. You can look at kind of your volume and your Wi-Fi network strength, any kind of thing you want. There's lots of different ways of doing this. And any script that you've got that works with DWM would work with Penrose. It's designed to sort of accept the same kind of behavior. So you could just run that and it would work fine. That's kind of why this is an out-of-the-box one. It means if you had something for DWM that worked, you can use it straight away for Penrose. Now, what we're going to have a look at is what Penrose adds on top of that. So those are some built-in widgets, and if you want, you can run with that. You can leave it alone. You can just call that helper function, and you have a status bar like DWM. Everything will work fine. But the support in Penrose is a little bit richer. Everything comes from this penrose-ui crate, and there is some ways of writing widgets that let you have a little bit more control and play around a little bit with things. We won't dig in too much to how the kind of workspaces widget works. That really roots around a lot in the window manager state to kind of check when things are changing and what's focused and what workspaces have clients on them and all that kind of stuff. We won't dig into that, but we'll have a look at how that widgets trait works. And then we'll have a look at making use of it. So that's going to be a couple of things. It's going to be one, not using that helper function anymore. So we're not going to use the status bar helper that just makes us a status bar. We're instead going to make one ourselves by calling try new. And if you have a look here, you've got similar kind of arguments to what we have for the status bar function we're using so far. But now we explicitly say, hey, and here's the list of widgets I want you to render out in the status bar. So we'll have to build up that list of widgets ourselves. But once we've got that set up, we'll have a status bar where we can then add and remove widgets and play around with stuff. And we're going to have a look at making our own widget. Now, I've got an idea for that. It's going to use a website called WTTR, which looks like this, which is super simple. Doesn't really do that much, just gives you the weather. But the nice thing is you can pull that on the command line. And it will render out, it's a bit big. That will give you some nice kind of text and ANSI color codes and bits and pieces so that you can play around with that. Now there's bits and pieces that you can do. So I think it's format equals 3 is one of the simple ones. Oops. And it will do that. And it will kind of give you your location, a little kind of icon for it, and the temperature. Oh, it's past 7 o'clock at night and it's still 29 degrees here. Yeesh. Yeah, that's hot for York. I'm from Scotland. This is hot. Like I'm too hot right now. This isn't good. Okay, so yeah, I thought that looks good. We could do something with that. That's some text. We can put that text in our status bar. So if we, well, let's do that just now. Let's show how that works. So there's another thing where you, if you go to the WTTR GitHub page and this one-line output, it's got a little kind of format template with percent notation, so you can kind of specify which which bits of data you want being returned from this thing. And so a format that I've had a look at that I think looks quite good is if we do %C, that'll get us the little icon. And if we do %T, that'll give us the temperature. We kind of don't need to be told where we are. We kind of know where we are. But if we do that, we get our little icon and 29 degrees Celsius, which still, no, that's just too much. So if we've got that, we can actually do xset root dash name, and we'll use the subshell for doing that. And then, cool, down in the bottom here, we've got our temperature. Cool. So we can do that with setroot, but we're going to write a widget that does that for us, so we don't need to care, because we don't want to have that shell script kind of floating around. Now, for doing this, we're going to have a look at my personal config, actually. Rather than kind of mess around with doing this completely from scratch and kind of go through all the bits and pieces, we're just going to lift and shift the status bar that I currently have, which is, broadly speaking, something that looks a bit like this, other than over on the right, I've got things like the date and time, Wi-Fi signal strength, volume, battery, that kind of stuff. So we're going to grab this, and then we'll get going with adding in our new widget, which we'll write once we've got that in place. So let's do that now. So if we come here, I think actually one thing we're going to do is we're getting enough code in here that we want to have a couple of different files, because otherwise it's just all ending up in a big mess, and it's a bit easier to think about if we break it apart. So penrose from scratch, it's not a particularly useful comment, but never mind. Pub mod bar, cool. And clearly we need to do add mod foo. Cool. Okay, so if we've got that, and then bar, this is config and logic for our status bar. Cool. So now librs shouldn't shout because it can see the modules there. That's good. And we're just going to come here and grab everything. Copy. Paste. Cool. Now, this is going to get upset because this is talking about stuff in my personal crate, which I don't have in that librs yet. So let's do that. Factor a few things out. Let's go to the main. So where are those constants? They're here. Yoink. So those will need to be pub. We'll want them in a few places. And what else do we need? Oh, max active window chars. Okay, so this one is, oh, we can just do that in here actually. Because we're only using that one here. This is just how many characters we want to limit this kind of middle section where we talk about the active window. If you let that be too long, so things like you saw there with Firefox, I think if we go back to Firefox, you see that this gets truncated. It gets like 3 dots down here. That's what's going on, is that's blown its 50 character limit and we're chopping it off. That's just so that if you end up opening a program that's just got an ungodly long window name for some reason, you don't blow away the rest of your status bar with your kind of date and time and all that kind of stuff. Because that would be annoying. You kind of want that to stay there. You want this one to kind of be bounded. So cool. So we've got max active window chars. That's fine. We've got our colors. Cool. That means we can get rid of these now because they're going to come in from the lib. And is there anything that we need to import? I think those will auto... No, those shouldn't auto import. I think they're going to get grumpy at some point. So we'll see. Cool. Right, so we've got some constants. We've got our mod. Do we have any errors? Can't find font in the scope. Yeah, cool, there we go. That's what I was expecting. All these things are going to be unhappy. So font, white, and black. Oh, that's okay, actually, because this is our text style that we've only currently got for making our status bar. So let's pop that in here. I think that's broadly the same as this one, isn't it? Oh, the font size is different. Yeah, because we bumped our font up so that it's not quite so dinky on YouTube. So that's fine. Cool. So we'll pop that in there. And then this needs... Oh, that's our spacing hook. So that's for giving us our space so that we don't render our windows on top of the status bar. That needs the bar height. So we'll import that from... Oh, we don't need you anymore. We'll import that from penrose from scratch bar height px. Cool. And status bar. Cool. So our status bar, let's get rid of all this. And oh, that shouldn't be unwrapped. That should be try. And we'll just call a status bar function that we're going to have from our bar status bar. Oh, and we don't need anything from penrose-ui anymore because that's all going to be used in the status bar or the bar module. Cool. And that's our status bar here. So that's what function we're now calling. So that's fine. This is a special kind of widget that I won't go into right now. That's kind of for putting some debug information into my status bar. So it helps me kind of track down misbehaving client windows and stuff like that. It's not really a thing you want in your status bar all the time, but it's nice to just have, you can use this as a bit of a kind of always on screen place to put some debug output if you're hacking on Penrose itself. It's kind of useful. Right, so I think we should be pretty much good to go. Other than this, we want our status bar at the bottom because I tend to have it up at the top. But like we said previously, my face is up at the top and that covers up the status bar. And the bit we're going to put is right in this corner where I'm going to sit. So rather than constantly show and hide my webcam, let's put the bar on the bottom like we've got. I think that should be fine. Do we have any other issues? What's wrong here? Okay, no. So I think we were just using a Penrose result before. Let's use that anyhow result we've used in a couple of places before. That just means that we don't need to worry about messing around with converting errors and all that kind of stuff. It means that we have this kind of okay Eye of Sauron thing that some people call it at the end. I don't mind it too much. I know there's some people who really hate it. I'm fine with it. I like that as I get to the end of a function, I can see that it's definitely something that's returning a result, particularly when it gets a bit long like this. Which actually, to be honest, this is getting quite long. We should factor some more of this stuff out. So I think I won't do that right now because it'll take not a huge amount of time, but a fair bit of time to just tidy stuff up. And it's not going to be super exciting to watch me refactor code. So I think once I've sorted all this out, I'll also break some other things out into modules and push that up to GitHub. If you're interested in how that kind of looks and goes through, there'll be a commit and some kind of commit message info on what's happened there. But cool, okay, so that's got our scratch pads, we're running our window manager, and we've got our bar all set up. So for the most part, this is the same as what we've got on screen at the moment. We've got the workspaces first, that's this. We've got the current layout, that's this. We've got our active window name, which is this one here, and that's got a slightly different styling because this is the one that's kind of back highlighted in blue. And then the bits that are new are this. So these are some widgets which are going to render out specific bits of information for us automatically. Now, what I think we'll do is we'll recompile. First we will, because we'll learn from last time, we'll run our test and make sure that's fine. We haven't changed anything with the key bindings, but good to check. As we found out last time, we don't want to crash the window manager. But yeah, we'll recompile, we'll get that sorted out, and then once that's in place and we can see the widgets, we'll have a quick look at those widgets and how they work, because that's going to give us a little bit of an idea on what we're going to do for making our weather widget. Weather widget is very satisfying to say, I've just realized. That's good. Cool. Okay, so tests are fine, our parsing of our key bindings. We didn't expect that to fail, but always good to confirm. And then when we run this and restart, what we should see is that our little weather indicator down at the bottom is going to change. So we'll get that back once we write our new widget, but for now, that's going to be replaced with Wi-Fi, battery, volume, and then date and time. So fingers crossed, restart, and there we go. Cool. So if you have a look, we've got Wi-Fi access point name and the Wi-Fi signal strength. We've got batteries. My ThinkPad's got 2 batteries and I'm plugged in, so both are 100%. We've got the audio, and then we've got the date and time in kind of year, month, day, hour, minute format. Nice. Now, how's any of that working? That's the important bit. So let's have a look. We don't need that anymore, and we'll come here. So inside of the penrose-ui crate, there is a module called bar widgets. And what we've got in here is a couple of different things. So one thing is this widget trait. This is the thing that kind of drives everything. We'll look at that in a sec. There's then a couple of structs that are specific widgets that you can make use of. So the active window name, current layout, root window name, workspaces, all those kinds of things. They're these ones that we're looking at just now, and they hook into the window manager state. They use those kind of hooks that we register. Actually, yeah, that's a point. Yeah, if you look at var add to, can I not go to definition on that in the moment? No, okay. Curse you, Rust Analyzer. So if you go to status bar and we look at add to, and look at the source of that, that's probably going to be faster. There we go. So all this is doing should now look pretty familiar from what we've looked at from the last few episodes. We add the entire status bar itself, so all the kind of logic for kind of drawing to the screen and the widgets themselves and all of the kind of state around that, that gets dropped in as a state extension. And then we add hooks for a variety of different things. We add event, manage, refresh, and startup hooks. And then those are used by the status bar to run logic in each widget when each of those events, each of those hooks is fired, and decide if it needs to re-render things to the screen. If it does need to re-render, it will then go and do all the graphic stuff it needs to do. If every widget says, actually, I haven't changed since last time, then it doesn't bother. So that's good. Kind of saves you a bit of needless re-rendering, which is always nice. But yeah, so that is us kind of dropping that into place. And after that's happening, it's all driven by kind of hooks and events and all that kind of stuff. Inside of here, those widgets are kind of driven by the window manager state. So things like the workspaces one, as you might imagine, is driven by kind of querying what workspace is currently on each screen, where clients are, where there's empty workspaces, all that kind of stuff. But you don't need to drive things from the window manager state if that's not applicable for you. So for example, my current battery level or the date and time has nothing to do with the internal window manager state. We don't care. And so in that case, there's a couple of things you can do that are much simpler. And to kind of show you what you're avoiding, if you want to write a widget from scratch, this is the trait you're implementing. So you have to implement how to draw the widget itself. So how are you going to render that in the status bar? You need to be able to say kind of the physical extent in terms of like X, Y, or width and height, I suppose. The current extent of that widget, so how much space is it going to take up in the status bar. That lets the status bar do layout. This required draw is that kind of lazy re-rendering stuff I was talking about. So if you don't need to re-render, you should have a way of checking that and saying, no, you don't need to redraw me at the moment. So the status bar only draws when it needs to. And is greedy is just a way of saying, if there's any extra space in the status bar, like once you've done the layout, give the extra space to me. And then these methods, which have default implementations of not doing anything, are points when your widget will be called, where you can decide to update internal state and say whether or not you need to draw or not. Now, if you have a look at the code for like the status bar widget, that's the most complicated one. But like the active window name, it's probably a reasonably simple one you could have a look at if you're interested in some sort of extra reading on that stuff. It's not too complicated, but you do need to go through and explain how all this stuff works. If all you really care about is periodically I want to update the text that's in there, like that DWM style status bar, then there is two things that can help you. There's refresh text and interval text. Now, interval text is brand new. I wrote that today because there is a gotcha with refresh text that is going to mean that our idea of curling that WTTR site for our weather information isn't really what we want to do with refresh text. So you'll see that in a sec. That's what this note on blocking code is. So this one is super, super simple. You build up your text style. That's something we've already seen from the status bar stuff that we've looked at so far. That's your kind of what font are you, what point size, what's your foreground, background color, spacing, that kind of stuff. And then once you've got that, you just provide a function that is, when you call this function, it will give you back a string. And that's the contents of the widget. Now, from that, there's like a default way I can implement you are a block of text with a certain bit of styling, and you will sit in the status bar. If you want to do more complicated things like the workspace widget down here, you need to go implement all yourself. But if you just care about foreground and background color and a piece of text, then this is enough. And so this one, for example, if you're running Arch and you have Pacman as your package manager, this is a super quick way to kind of say, how many packages do you have installed? I don't know why you would want that. Maybe you do. I've seen status bars with that kind of thing before. But as a kind of simple example, that will work. So each time we call like getText, we will shell out, grab that information from Pacman, and then return a string that kind of is going to be put into the status bar. And the refresh text, as you might imagine from the name, runs every time that we refresh and render out to the X server. Now, that's why we have this note on blocking code. If your getText function takes a reasonable amount of time to run, so for example, that curl looks pretty quick. If we time it, that's taking 0.164 seconds. That sounds fast, but in terms of like time for computers to run, pretty slow because we're going out over the network. And my internet connection is all right today. Sometimes it's really quite terrible. And that can get really slow really quickly. And if that's running every time you refresh the state and render out to the screen, you're running that a lot. And so you don't want something slow as a sort of refresh widget, because what you're going to notice is that your window manager gets very, very laggy. Because like I said before, the status bar is running as a state extension and hooks, which means it's running in the window manager main event loop. Any blocking code you're running is blocking the window manager from being able to actually run as the window manager. So if you're going to go and curl something that's going to take 5 seconds to return, you're waiting 5 seconds for that curl to return after each refresh, and it just means your window manager is unusable at that point. So if you're doing that, that's what interval text is for. This is something that I put together this morning, just when I was thinking about this idea and wanting to do it with the curl. And this one's a little bit different. So you write your function as you did before, that's fine, but you give me one extra thing. And the extra thing you give me is a duration. So this is just something from the standard library. You can do duration from seconds, from milliseconds, and whatever duration you want. That's the granularity that this will be run. And so this will spawn a thread, and on that interval, it will run and update your widget contents using the function you've provided. Now that means that it's happening independently of refresh. It just sits off in the background and periodically updates. So this, for example, will run every 5 minutes. And that means that we don't really need to go and ask what the weather and the temperature is every single time we modify the window manager state, like every single time we change the title of a window or add open or close a program. Kind of don't care. 5 minutes is probably enough. That's probably too much, to be honest. Probably do it every hour. But that just lets us kind of slow that down a bit and run it off in the background, which is nice. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this for writing our widget. And actually, we can probably just take this example now that I've got it in here. Let's pinch that and pop it into our bar rs. So we pop that down here. I'll put the imports up at the top. Some of these are probably going to be duplicated at this point. And, oh, that's sort of top level code, isn't it? Let's just comment you out while we get this working. So we've got Penrose, and what is grumpy here? Why are you upset? Oh, it's because we've imported it multiple times, right? So bar widgets, let's just put interval text in here, and then we can get rid of you. And for Penrose, we've already got color, we just need XX gone. Cool. We can get rid of you. Cool. Okay, so we now have our interval text that we can use for writing our widget, and we've got our duration, which we can use for setting this up. This is going to be get weather text. So that's fine. And then we're going to have a same as we've got here, we're going to have a function that takes our style and returns an interval text. That's what we're going to do. So this is going to be current weather info. And that's going to take style, which is a reference to a text style. And that's going to return an interval text. And so we can then just use that, and that should be it. We don't need this style because we've got our style set up already above, so that's fine. Get rid of you, and it's not my get text, it's get web text. Cool. Oh, wait, no, that's not returning, is it? I need to return that value. Cool. And that doesn't need to be a reference because it's already a reference, so that's fine. Let's put you under there. And then let's pop the weather last. No, let's not pop it last. Let's put it first. Actually, I think we'll do that. I like having the time on the far right so I can quickly find it. Cool. Okay, so that was kind of just pinched from the docs. It's a bit of a blue beater. Here's one I did earlier, but it really is that simple. Like, we can write any function we want that goes away and generates a string, and then it's this simple to add a widget that then refreshes on a particular interval. So in this case, it's refreshing every 5 minutes. Now, given what happened last time when we tried editing the window manager and adding stuff in without testing it, let's write a quick test for this and make sure that that's actually working properly. Now, I've nabbed this from the docs, and I was testing that before. That should all be fine, but let's make absolutely sure. Because what I don't want is for this to all break. And actually, we were using a different one, weren't we? Yeah, we were using %c, %t. %c, %t. Cool. Okay, so we'll use super star to bring in everything from above. We'll write our test. Get weather text works. That's my kind of throwaway test title for things that are just double check I got this right. We might as well leave this test lying around afterwards, but for now, we're just going to say let s equal get weather text. And then we want to see what we got. So let's just assert eq that s is an empty string. Oh no, because it might be an empty string if that request fails, because we're doing unwrap or default. So let's actually say shouldn't do this. Now this is, we could write this as an example like we did last time, but then we have to get the example file set up, go and compile that, yada yada, deal with bits and pieces. I find it a bit easier to just do things this way, where I write a test that will definitely fail by asserting that the value is something it can never be, so that it dumps out what the value is. Your mileage may vary on whether you like that as a way of kind of quickly checking kind of logic that's generating a value, but I kind of like it as a way of doing it. And cool, yeah, there we go. So our test fails because we've actually got the text we wanted, which is our little icon and the weather, which is still 29 degrees. Yeesh. Yeah, it's nearly 8 o'clock at night. It shouldn't be 29 degrees in New York. That's not okay. Cool. Anyway, so rather than leave that in, because there's no way that test is ever going to actually pass, so that'll always be failing for us. And we also don't want to kind of assert that it's a particular output, because we're going off to the network and checking stuff. We just want to say that it shouldn't be an empty string, I suppose. And then if we do that, then we've at least got a quick check when we're running our tests that the API we're hitting is still giving us back something. And if it's not what we expected, it's going to be pretty obvious, because it's going to be down in the status bar on the bottom, and it's going to be easy for us to see that that doesn't work. Cool. Okay, so get weather text works. Nice. So that should do it, to be honest. So we've got our helper function for going and grabbing a string. It works. And we've added that into our list of widgets here. So if we do our make build and sudo make install, dash debug on both of those, so it's a little bit faster, and we have a look, we should see, after Russ has slowly compiled our changes, there we go, that we now have the weather. Cool, and we do have the weather, nice. So we've got 29 degrees, lovely. And our status bar is nice and responsive in terms of not lagging. And that's because we're not running that curl every single time. We don't need to. We're just running it every 5 minutes now. So that ran once when we first started up. That's why there was a little bit of lag when we were first kind of getting set up, because it's making sure that we've got that initial value. But once you've got that, it now sits in the background and updates itself every 5 minutes. And then when something else comes through and causes the status bar to re-render, it will re-render as well. Nice. But yeah, so that's kind of it. You can write big complicated widgets. You can do all sorts of bits and pieces that you can kind of run whatever logic you want, and then you can kind of go through the layout for it. I'm not gonna do a deep dive in how the penrose-ui crate works in terms of graphics programming. It's deliberately dumb as hell. It's super minimal and simple. There's probably way smarter ways of doing it. I'm not a graphics guy, as you might imagine. I am a sort of back-end and API and sort of systems-y kind of person. I don't really do graphics particularly much, which is why I have a text-based status bar, and that's it. But it's fairly minimal in what it provides you, but there's a couple of abstractions and little helpers in there to help you kind of set the font you want and set the coloring correctly and kind of stamp out your kind of sections of your widgets. If you're wanting to try something fancy, that workspaces widget is the one to look at. That's the kind of most complicated one I've got that's in there. But don't expect this to be kind of a fully featured kind of graphics library for doing arbitrary things. It definitely isn't. It's deliberately very minimal and primarily just for backing the status bar. But if that kind of minimal thing or making a fancier widget is a thing that you think sounds kind of fun, definitely go have a look. The source code for that is just in the main Penrose repository. Do I have that open at the moment? I don't. So it's just in crates, and if you go to crates, penrose-ui, that's it. It's here. So you can have a look through there, and you can look at the stuff we've been looking at so far. But for now, I think we'll wrap up there. We've got our status bar now driven by some nice little widgets that are kind of rendering out a bit of system information for us. That's always nice. And we have the weather, which is great, because that means I can keep track on when it actually cools down. Hopefully it gets below 29 degrees, because this is too hot. But yeah, I think next time round, that's in place. I'm going to do a little bit of tidy up and refactoring with our code base so that we don't just have everything in the main RS other than the status bar. And then next time, we'll have a look at layouts finally, which is going to be fun. So I need to have a think about a fun layout to implement. We might try and do the Fibonacci one, because I don't have that at the moment. It's a kind of standard kind of tiling window manager meme layout almost. I can't imagine anyone uses it really for day-to-day use, but it's a thing to implement. We'll have a look. So until then, have fun implementing some widgets. Let me know if you have anything cool that you think might be useful adding into the main Penrose crate as something that other people can use, and I'll catch you next time. Bye, folks.